Dark Side of the Moon is the 22nd episode of Season 7 of Frasier. This is directed by David Lee, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. And it starts off with Daphne speaking with a therapist, and she says that the judge felt different. The therapist said that. And of course, it begs the question, why did Daphne have to speak with a judge? And then we get the rest of the story told in flashbacks. And ordinarily, I'm not a huge fan of that kind of narrative structure for sitcoms, but it does work really well with this episode. She's at Niles' apartment and has a surprise bridal shower. And Donny has organised another surprise for her. Her favourite brother is arriving, except it's not her favourite brother. It's Simon, played by Anthony LaPaglia, and there is no reason for him to have a Cockney accent. I don't understand why he has a Cockney accent. I guess maybe he could have moved from Manchester, but it seems like a bit of an oversight. If anybody has any information on that I'm missing, though, please feel free to share. And he ends up having to stay with Daphne and Frasier and Martin, of course, and he's just completely getting in the way. But it's not all bad news for Frasier, as Holly, Daphne's friend, comes over. And Holly is played by Kelly Miracco, and I apologise if I mispronounced that. And it seems like they're getting along really well, and it seems like Holly is interested in Frasier. And then the next thing we see is Simon and Holly making out. So that's not exactly going according to anybody's plan either. He then later comes back in with some new friends he's made. They're really rowdy. Martin's not too bothered. I think he can maybe get on well with Simon, but nobody else feels that way. And then Roz comes over. Simon forgot he made a date with Roz, but he was still going to go on the date with her after saying goodbye to his new female friend. And I don't want to use the word date. I don't really think it's a date, but certainly it's somebody he could potentially be getting hot and heavy with, and goes with Roz, and obviously Roz isn't having this, and he's very demanding of Daphne, and Martin and Frasier are demanding of Daphne, and she is clearly just had enough. And we do occasionally see this side of Daphne, but never to this extent. She goes to do laundry, she comes back in, her favourite dress is ruined, it's an absolute disaster, and then Donny's parents arrive. Donny surprised Daphne with a visit from his parents. This is Barbara Sharma and John David Conti playing Mr. and Mrs. Douglas. And Daphne is she's not in the right frame of mind to meet them. She's not dressed and looking how she'd want to the first time they meet. And then somebody arrives from the laundry room because Daphne had thrown their things aside because somebody had done that to her dress. And she takes this woman's laundry and launches it out of the balcony. And obviously the clothing goes down to the cars and causes what we know is a 4-car pileup. And it's just this huge outburst from Daphne. And I would argue, and I could be wrong about this, but this is my reading of the situation, that yes, all of these things would be really irritating, but she's not able to deal with these things and manage those emotions of being irritated because she's also dealing with the emotional turmoil of very obviously being attracted to Niles and not knowing what to do about it. I think if that wasn't a factor, she'd probably she'd just go out. She just wouldn't stay in the house. She just wouldn't deal with it. But because she's not thinking clearly, it builds up and up and up, and this pressure just erupts. And it's great to see this side of Daphne because I think it's healthy. Not in that way, don't cause a car pileup, but we never really see Daphne having such an outburst, and she does seem to suppress things quite a lot. So it's quite nice to see that actually Daphne can get really, really annoyed, because I think in a way, as long as you deal with it healthily, which, yeah, Daphne maybe didn't here, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And, of course, I was going to say, of course, that's how we get to the therapy, but before that, just after Daphne's thrown the clothing off the balcony and we hear the cars, Frasier comes storming out of his bedroom and says, fine, I guess I'll just have to make my own tea, because he'd asked Daphne for tea, and he was oblivious to all of the chaos, and it was just very, very funny. And then her therapist said something that I thought was really obvious from the first time Daphne said this in the episode, but maybe not, because she happened to mention earlier on that she was wearing her favourite dress, and her brother had splashed wine all over it, or champagne, I can't remember which. And, of course, the question is, why was she wearing her favourite dress in Niles' apartment if the bridal shower was a surprise? So I thought it was very obvious early on, but only at the end of the episode did the therapist point that out and say, but you thought you were going over there to make sticky toffee pudding with Niles, which in itself sounds a bit strange. But And also, probably not the right dress to wear if you're doing that either. But obviously, Daphne wanted to impress Niles. But it became clear that she maybe wasn't doing that consciously. And she had to realise that, and as the therapist said, it might be time to start calling him Niles instead of Dr. Crane. And she realizes that this is the truth and she can't suppress those feelings anymore, because look what happens when she does that and she doesn't work through those emotions. Everything else piles on top of it and it erupts. And she says, "What do I do?" And the therapist said, "Time's up." So leaving that in terms of Daphne on a bit of a cliffhanger, and I think it's a very strong episode. It ends with Frasier in his apartment, just astonished by the absolute chaos that Simon has caused. And it's a great episode. As I said, I don't usually care for episodes that are really told in flashbacks. I just don't love it. Even when it's fresh material like this, it's not like a compilation or anything. I just don't love it as a narrative structure. But with this one, it worked really, really well. Having those scenes with the therapist were really important, rather than, for example, there are some episodes where I can't think of one off the top of my head, maybe you can name one, where Frasier's maybe in Cafe Nervosa with somebody and then he's recounting the story and then we get the flashbacks, and it just tell me the story, don't give me the flashbacks. But with this one, the therapist's office really served a key purpose for Daphne moving forward with her feelings, so I like that quite a lot. And in general, I can't really fault it, apart from Simon's Cockney accent, which is very peculiar and very bizarre. Dark Side of the Moon is a really brilliant, really solid episode of Frasier.